Trung thu có gì vui vậy mẹ?
Trời lung linh quá trời lung linh, cười rung rinh nói cười rung rinh, đêm bánh trà để cô trông trăng.
Ngày trung thu trên tàu ký ức là kinh đô của niềm háo hức, mang đến nụ cười mãi.
Con cũng muốn đi chơi trung thu như mẹ kể.
Mai ba mẹ dành cả ngày cùng con chơi trung thu.
Dạ.
Trọn một ngày sum vầy, sáng mãi chuyện đêm trăng.
Trung thu có gì vui nhỉ?
Dẫu trung thu này có chút khác xưa, nhưng niềm vui của trẻ thơ cần lưu giữ vẹn nguyên. Cùng Kinh Đô dành trọn một ngày sum vầy, sáng mãi chuyện đêm trăng. Cùng Kinh Đô dành trọn một ngày sum vầy, sáng mãi chuyện đêm trăng. Trung thu này cùng Kinh Đô trao thành ý vàng, sáng mãi chuyện đêm trăng. Dẫu năm tháng đổi thay, bánh trung thu Kinh Đô vẫn luôn là món quà gửi trao thành ý, gắn kết tình thân. Kinh Đô trao thành ý vàng, sáng mãi chuyện đêm trăng. Dẫu năm tháng đổi thay, bánh trung thu Kinh Đô vẫn luôn là món quà gửi trao thành ý, gắn kết tình thân. Kinh Đô trao thành ý vàng, sáng mãi chuyện đêm trăng.
So, it's been 5 generations of Windows since 2001, each release possessing its own exciting and new features. Most of the time. But aside from features, how well does each actually run? How is performance impacted over each release of Windows? So here are the versions we're looking at. Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and the latest version of Windows 10 at the time of this recording. All of these are running Pro Editions, and XP is the only one running a 32-bit version, mostly because that's the version that was used the most. They're all fully updated, and if you're interested in the specs, here they are. It really shouldn't matter because all of them are running on the same hardware anyways. So, beginning with the startup tests, now it's important to note that I tried to do everything as close to accurate as possible in the editing. This includes opening programs at the same time, starting up at the same time, and all that stuff. I really want to get the best results, but remember, nothing is exactly perfect. Now, Windows 10 and 8.1 actually have a technology called Fast Boot, while Windows XP has the advantage of just using less hardware resources. I don't think Windows 7 or Vista have like any advantage for starting up, but still, Windows 8.1 actually started up first. This is mostly because Windows 8.1 comes with less bloatware. It still comes with bloatware, but it comes with less bloatware than Windows 10, so that kind of makes sense. But after that, we have Windows 10, and literally milliseconds later, we have Windows XP, followed by Windows Vista a couple of seconds later, and then a long time afterwards, we have Windows 7. So that's pretty interesting. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's more 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. Now, before testing programs, I really want to check the storage. So as you can see, Windows XP actually takes up the least amount of storage, while Windows Vista and 7 actually take up the most amount of storage. This could be because of the abundance of security updates, but I applied these updates to Windows 8.1 and 10 as well, which I don't really understand. So starting off with built-in programs, I really want to see the speed of File Explorer, and as you can see, they were all pretty fast, but Windows 8.1 was the first to load, and results are pretty varied here. Moving on to Notepad, this is probably like the least intensive application in Windows, but as you can see, XP was the first to load, probably due to the lack of animation. But again, strangely enough, there are varied results here. There's probably a percentage error somewhere around here. But these are really low-end applications, so I'm not really that surprised that these applications are running. There isn't like consistent results here, but as you can see, Calculator actually loaded up at the exact same time on every single one except for Windows 8.1, and that's really weird considering that Windows 8.1 was pretty much winning every other test before this. So that's pretty strange. Moving on to Paint, again, there really isn't any real answer here. All the results are pretty varied. It's really weird that XP and Vista loaded up at the same exact time. But we probably use Windows for more than built-in programs, and that's media consumption. So opening a photo using their default photo viewer, so as you can see, was pretty much straight down the line. I forgot to run this test on Windows 8.1 because of course I did, but we can basically assume that it would have been second last. Then moving on to opening a video using VLC Media Player. Strangely enough, Windows 7, this was the first time it came first in a test. Then it was Windows 10, then XP, then 8.1, and then Vista. So strangely enough, these results are also varied. And also I decided to use a variety of applications. Some of them are using same versions, some of them are using different versions. So I decided to use Windows Media Player to open this video file. And Windows XP and Vista doesn't even support the proper codecs for MP4 files. But as you can see, results are pretty similar. Moving on to web browsers, I really want to check the installation speed of Firefox 52.9 ESR in every single one of these. Of course, this is mostly dependent on my hands and reaction time, but I tried to do it as accurately as possible, as I said before. And the reason why we're using Firefox 52.9 ESR rather than the later versions is because older versions don't support the later versions, and I want it to be as fair as possible. So known as the bad operating systems by the public actually outperform the good operating systems, so that's pretty ironic actually. But when we open the web browser itself, it's actually a completely different story. So newer is technically better here. Windows 10 opened up Firefox first while Windows XP was last, and it was pretty much straight down the line, and Windows 7 and 8.1 has some slightly different results. But anyways, moving on to YouTube.com, this was it doesn't really have any impact on operating systems, really. This was mostly dependent on the web browser, and as you can see, it's pretty inconsistent overall, so I'm not really surprised that Windows 10 did better, but actually, Windows 10 might have better compatibility with Wi-Fi drivers or something like that, but I'm not really sure, so anyways, it doesn't really matter. But moving on to Microsoft.com, 3 of them loaded up at the exact same time, while 2 of them loaded them last at the exact same time. Interesting results. One of the most used programs in Windows, at least I think it's one of the most used programs in Windows, is Office software. Now, I used Office 2010 because that's like literally the only version that supports all of these, and as you can see, there was an activation message, so I really wanted to base it off the activation message because that's when really it loads up completely. But as you can see, Vista loaded up first, and Windows 10 was actually very, very slow. After that, 8.1 was first with PowerPoint 2010, while Windows 10 is extremely slow. I don't know why. Then moving on to Excel, the same thing. Windows 8.1 was first, while Windows 10 was really, really slow. I'm not really sure what's going on here. So Windows 10, not really looking good. And this is a frequently used application, so to see Windows 10 performing really bad with that is quite disturbing. Next, I really want to test the speed of how fast a USB can transfer a very large ISO file, and all of these are using the same exact USB and ISO file, so it should be pretty fair. And first up was actually Windows Vista, and then right after that we have Windows 7, so file transfer is actually pretty good on Windows Vista and 7. Then it was actually Windows 8.1, and believe it or not, Windows 10 actually outperformed Windows XP, and I don't know why, but Windows XP did really bad on that test. A critical application we use every single day on Windows is an anti-malware application, so running a scan of Malwarebytes on all of these, 2 of them are using older versions while 3 of them are using the latest version. I had to do a lot of speeding up because some of these were taking an extremely long time, but as you can see, Windows 10 was the first to finish the test, followed by Windows Vista, then Windows 8.1, so these results are pretty inconsistent, but strangely enough, Windows XP wasn't really good in this test. It actually performed the worst. Windows 7 did come 4th. As sad as it is, I'm starting to see a negative pattern with Windows XP. Now, before running benchmarks on all of these, I really want to see how much of a difference user account control made on opening applications. So running Geekbench 2, unsurprisingly, Windows XP did load the application first just because it did not have user account control. Other operating systems have varied results. And here's the moment you've been waiting for, running a Geekbench 2 benchmark on all of these. And, yeah, Windows Vista performed the best, so yeah, I don't know what to say. Windows XP actually performed really bad, and Windows 10 was last, which is the only thing I was expecting. And this really teaches us a lesson, and it's that if you're looking for a computer and you're looking for good speed, don't focus on the operating system. The purpose of an operating system is to provide a user interface that allows the user to use a computer with ease, not speed. I mean, it matters, but not that much. And either way, we just saw so many varied and inconsistent results that frankly, the operating system doesn't really matter at all. Some of these operating system speeds could be hardware dependent, but don't quote me on that. But if I were to pick which operating system did the best, I definitely say Windows 8.1, strangely enough. It did really well in all of these tests, and I really don't know why. Worst being XP in my opinion based on the results, but this could mostly be because of the lack of optimization for most programs. I mean, they're compatible enough to run, but they're probably not optimized properly. So don't let that put you down if you're really upset about XP's results. And let's finish this off with a shutdown test. Now, Windows 8.1 just wins just straight out of the box, and then Windows 10 comes out a second later. Then we have to do a little bit of waiting for the other operating systems, but a little bit afterwards, we see that Windows 7 does come third. And then a little bit after that, we have Windows Vista, and then Windows XP comes last. And that's pretty much it for the speed test. So I really want to thank you all for watching this video. This video was not easy. I really wanted to do another test or two, but this video just was so hard to edit that I just couldn't do it. I was losing my mind. Streaming 5 different footages into one and then editing them all at the same time really takes up a lot of my processing power for my computer. Just my computer can't handle it. So that's why this video took so long. So I appreciate your time. A like, a subscribe, any comment, anything would be greatly appreciated. And if comment, anything would be greatly appreciated. And if I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't expecting to make this video again, but based on the immense support from last time, I felt like it was a comparison worth revisiting. But this time, we'll be doing a lot more than just opening and closing a bunch of applications to truly see how well each OS does in terms of utilizing hardware and software. So as usual, we have the same 5 operating systems, XP, Vista, 7, 8.1, and 10, all of them fully updated except this time, XP is running the 64-bit version, so it'll be able to utilize the 8GB of RAM that the computer has. Speaking of RAM, this is the hardware we're working with. Just as a little refresher, again, just like last time, this shouldn't really affect anything in terms of the operating system, so without further ado, let's dig straight into it. Starting off things simple, I wanted to do a login and logoff test. Now, unlike starting up a computer, logging in and logging off is something we all pretty much do every day. That is, if you own a computer. So, with logging off, Windows 8.1 was blazing fast, followed by Windows 7, 10, and Vista, which were very close in terms of speed, while Windows XP was dead last. Surprisingly, this looks very similar to my conclusion from last time, where I said XP was the worst and 8.1 was the best. This doesn't really correlate with that, but I just found it as a funny coincidence. Ironically though, logging into the computer was a completely different story. Windows XP was the best, while Windows 10 and 8.1 were the absolute worst. So, pretty much straight down the line, you were being slower here. So, logging in and logging off are completely different stories in terms of speed. Moving on to a different kind of test, I wanted to see how RAM was affected by each OS, and I did this in 2 different ways. First, I just simply checked the amount of RAM being used in Task Manager, and unsurprisingly, Windows XP took up the least amount of RAM, and then there was a little bit of a jump usage with Windows Vista, generally staying the same with 7 and 8.1, and then another spike with Windows 10. So the rumors are true. Windows 10 does take up a lot more RAM than their predecessors. I also wanted to do a kind of real world test where I opened a bunch of tabs in Google Chrome until the RAM capacity reached 5 gigabytes, mostly to see how each OS utilizes and manages each tab and which one is the most optimized. And here are the results for that. Now, I did want to reiterate that these were all running the same version of Chrome, version 49, just so I could be as accurate as possible. And these results basically mean that older is better. The older 3 operating systems managed to hold up around 60 tabs, while the 2 newer ones only managed to hold up around 50, Windows 7 being the best here. Next up, CPU management. Now, doing the same thing for the RAM, I checked the CPU usage for all of these in Task Manager while nothing was being run in the background, and they're all basically the same. I mean, like a 0.5% difference barely means anything. I'd rely more on the benchmarks for something like this because it's kind of hard to do a real-world test with the CPU. I did try and do this while running a YouTube video. It was a complete disaster, and I just chose to stick with the benchmarks instead, which will come later in the video. However, something I could measure was the temperature of the CPU, and I did this using a program called RealTemp if you're wondering how I did this. Now, I did have to do some averaging, but I did try my best to be as accurate as possible. So, as you can see, Windows 7 was the coolest of the 5 operating systems, whereas XP was the hottest, and everything else was pretty much in the middle. It was pretty interesting to find out that there was almost a 10-degree gap between XP and 7. On the complete other spectrum, I wanted to see what was the hottest temperature the CPU could get to under a CPU stress test. Now, based on the results, it looks like they're generally the same, but Windows 10 for some reason has a 4 to 5 degree difference among all of them. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but there you go. Moving on to the battery test, this was definitely one of the most time-consuming tests I have ever done, but it was so worth it at the end to see it side by side, and results were actually pretty shocking. So, here get a bunch of different programs loaded, including Audacity, Chrome with 5 tabs, which includes a YouTube video, Adobe Reader, and all that stuff, all running on battery on each of these OSs, and remember, all of them were unplugged at the exact same time at full charge. So, out of nowhere, Windows XP did the absolute worst on this test. Like, I don't know why, but there was such a big gap between XP and 4th place that I needed to cut the video. I'm not trying to be biased here, but I'm actually very surprised that XP performed like this compared to the others. And second last was Windows 7, which is followed by Windows Vista, and believe it or not, the two most recent operating systems actually outperformed the three older ones. Windows 8 just dominating all of them. I was pretty surprised because I thought the older OSs consumed less power, but it just might be worse battery management, which is something I wasn't expecting. A fast connection is something we all want, and how does a different version of Windows affect speeds? Well, I can't really say. I did a trial of 10 tests for each OS and picked the best scores for each, and well, it looks very inconsistent. Windows 7 had an overwhelmingly high score, while Windows Vista had the lowest score, which is strange because they're basically the same operating system. But unlike download speed, upload speed had somewhat of a pattern. Newer is actually better here. 8.1 had an overwhelmingly high score, whereas XP had the absolute worst score, a 25 megabyte difference, which is a difference I wasn't expecting. And here's audio editing. I did want to open a few applications for this video as well, so launching Audacity at the same time on all of these, and well, Windows Vista was the fastest, finally winning for the first time in this video, and a lot of ties in here as well. Actually, rendering an audio file itself was very fast on all of these, so I did have to slow it down to see which one did it the fastest, and apparently, the three most recent OSs did it the best in a three-way tie, but honestly, they were all so fast that I doubt the operating system will impact it that much anyways, but then again, it wasn't a very big audio file I was rendering either. And because I missed this from the previous video, I wanted to open an audio file in all of these, and it was pretty much straight down the line, so XP was the quickest and Windows 10 and 8.1 were the slowest of the bunch. Just as a reminder, all of these were using the latest version of Windows Media Player that each OS can use. Now for the video editing test. I ran into a lot of issues with Windows XP because I couldn't find a free video editor to use with the 64-bit version of XP, and I ended up switching to the 32-bit version just to be able to find a compatible video editor, and even then, XP is using a slightly older version. But anyways, after rendering the same video editing project in all of these OSs, Windows 7 and 8.1 won by a landslide. They were both the absolute fastest, they rendered the entire video the fastest, and the 1080p 30 FPS video was ready to be watched. Sometime later, Windows Vista does come third place, which is a pretty reasonable placing for an operating system of this age, and then Windows 10 does come fourth. So, wow, I don't know what happened between Vista and XP, but the difference in rendering time was so large that by the time Windows 10 finished rendering the video, Windows XP wasn't even halfway done. And I suspect this has something to do with the 32-bit version of XP and its RAM limitation. But for those curious, the video editor being used is called VSDC Free Video Editor, and it served its purpose for this test. Also, as another application opening test, I wanted to see which OS could fully open and load a PDF the quickest. So for this one, I wanted to wait until the entire application was fully loaded up, not just which could show it up first, and there were varied results, but on the bright side, Windows Vista won its second test, so there we go. Next, I wanted to unzip a very large zip file to see which one could extract all the contents of it the fastest. Just like some previous tests, I did have to speed up this one because again, the file was pretty large, but anyways, Windows 8.1 does come first, followed by Windows 7, then Windows 10, and then Windows XP, and finally Windows Vista does come fifth. And I'd say these results don't prove that much because it's somewhat varied, and I was just kind of curious as to what would happen. And once again, the moment we've all been waiting for, the benchmarks. So using benchmark data I've gathered from CPU-Z, for the single-threaded score, it looks like Windows XP earned the gold medal by a huge margin actually. My theory is that this is because of the kinds of CPUs that were present during the XP days when there weren't many threads or cores and it was kind of optimized for that. But for the multi-threaded scores, I can happily say that scores generally got better as newer OSs were released, Windows 8.1 being the king here. So it's really good to know that Microsoft was actually improving over time and not just sitting at their desks playing solitaire or something like that. And for the final benchmark, I wanted to see which OS did the best in terms of GPU performance. So the benchmark I'm using is 3D Mark 9, which is a pretty old version of 3D Mark, but I wanted to be as fair as possible with Windows XP. Also, keep in mind that this is being done with integrated graphics, so no discrete graphics cards or anything like that. And similar to the last benchmark, I can happily say the same, that as time went by, graphical performance also improved, so I'm pretty happy about that, especially about Windows 10. And I wanted to end things off with the absolute most important thing, and that was comparing the blue screen of death on each of these operating systems. So, yeah, so, they're good. So what's my conclusion? Well, honestly, mostly the same as last time. I'd still say don't choose an operating system solely based on its speed. You should still mostly focus on its features and overall reliability. And just like last time, I still think 8.1 was the best and XP was the worst because for the more significant tests like battery, video editing, Wi-Fi, and all the important stuff, XP did underperform and 8.1 did unusually well. But remember, I just drew my own conclusion. I'm interested in seeing what everyone else's opinion is, so comment what you think was the best and worst OS. Anyways, that's just about it. I really hope you all enjoyed the video. Anything from a like, comment, or sub is always appreciated and helps out the channel a ton. I'm sorry it took this long, but man, my computer just can't handle putting together 5 streams of 1080p video. I'm not even kidding, parts of this video took over 21 hours to render. Yeah, 21 hours, but it was all worth it at the end to bring you all a worthy comparison. So, thanks for watching and I'll see you all later.
Happy Brazilian Independence Day, cute cores. Happy Brazilian Independence Day, cute cores.
Thank you.